Thank you. So our next and final presentation will be the paper, The Vertical Farm, the Skyscraper as Vehicle for Sustainable Urban Agriculture. This paper will be presented by Dickson Despommier and Eric Ellingsen. Dickson Despommier is a professor of public health and microbiology at Columbia University. He is a researcher of infectious disease. He's an infectious disease ecologist with a strong interest in West Nile virus epidemics in the United States. Eric Ellingsen is a senior lecturer at the College of Architecture, Illinois Institute of Technology, where he is assistant director of the Graduate Landscape Program. And he continues to work as the assistant directing architect on an ongoing archaeological dig in Aphrodisias, Turkey, and has spent a year building hand-dug wells in Ghana, West Africa. So let's hear from our presenters, and we'll have questions after this final talk. Thank you.
So perhaps this presentation is appropriate just before adjourning to have dinner. What I'd like to present to you is an overview of the state of affairs that our food gathering capabilities have come to over the last 50 years and where it might be heading in the next 20 years. And I'm sure we're all aware of the fact that getting food from one place to the next is the biggest problem of facing global agriculture today. The other big problems include food disasters around the world and what that effect might have on local economies. And then perhaps after all the gloom and doom that I can present to you, get you feeling really terrible, offer a potential solution for some of these problems at least that might involve a combination of ways of looking at sustainability, which plays into the urban landscape and allows for a variety of positive outcomes, provided that we pay attention to how we handle the energy that goes in and out of the proposal that we're about to put before you today. So to know where we are is to know how we find ourselves in a world that we have created apart from what we would consider the natural world. And so if you just made a comparison of us versus them, and that's everybody except us, we've worked harder and harder to sort of shield ourselves, as the last presentation clearly showed, from all of the elements that we consider to be adverse. Our temperature, humidity levels, even though I was not terribly cold when the poll was taken at the session that I was at this afternoon. Other people experienced discomfort over the amount of temperature that they're most used to. They would prefer it a little bit warmer. But we all seek our own comfort levels. We've provided for this by the built environment. Whereas nature continues to recycle everything in a way which remains largely unfamiliar to most of us. So the recycling of everything versus the linearity of living in a world where we obtain something, we use it, and then discard it, including the way we handle our energy sources, has created massive problems that we're all painfully aware of. It has created inequalities which are palpable. Among which are not just the fact that there are a lot of hungry people out there, but it's not just a food distribution problem either. It's a matter of providing for an entire country's worth of food in most cases. Much of this occurs throughout the disadvantaged world, and I would call them disadvantaged because of where they live more than who they are. Living in one place means that your agriculture is alive and well, and will probably survive for quite a while. Namely, let's take a place like the United States or Western Europe. But if you move to a place like Africa or in Central and South America, they are geographically disadvantaged, and as a result, every time a natural disaster occurs, it creates a human disaster as well. Nonetheless, since we're all human beings, we're all entitled to these minimum standards of 2.3 liters of clean drinking water a day, plus around 2,000 calories as an adult at least. And that's as long as our genetics will allow it. Now, why should we be concerned about urban farming, or even have an interest in it? And apparently there's a huge interest in this, because this is not the only mention of the fact that we might want to raise our food inside. At this meeting even, we have mixed-use buildings that incorporate that quite nicely into a more sustainable, but not wholly sustainable, approach to the way we obtain our food and in fact the way we live our lives. But just for a moment, reflect on some of the disasters that have happened in the recent past, and here's a good one that I'm familiar with. It happened in my own country of the United States, where we had a flood in 1993 that caused $25 billion worth of crop damage. Now that's trivial compared to, you know, the national budget or even the national debt. The farm bill in our country is $100 billion. The reason why is to cover disasters like this. Now, if this happened in a country that needed all of that food, you can imagine what would happen. And in fact, that has happened in many places throughout the world. And if too much water is a problem, then no water is an even worse problem. Droughts are more experienced now than they have been in the past. Flooding also is more experienced now than it has in the past. And that's a good hint that even though we're not aware of the causes of rapid climate change, that climate is changing. And it's changing more rapidly than we would like. Let's just put it that way. And here's, you know, one of those big floods that happened. And if that's not enough, of course, we can add pests to this, all kinds of insect pests and other microbial approaches to our loss of crops, which cuts down about 50% altogether of everything we grow, is eventually either ending up in some other animal's stomach than ours, or is being degraded by microbes before it gets to our plate. This even happens after we have a bumper crop and we store it. All of a sudden, you look around and half of it is spoiled, or half of it is eaten by rodents. Coupled with an encroachment into the environment, which is predicated on the fact that our populations have been growing, some at a larger rate than others. In fact, we're all aware of the fact that in Western Europe and in North America at least, the population explosion has actually imploded, and we are now in reverse form, actually in negative population growth. For the first time in their history, Korea and Japan announced zero population growth. All of that was the result of economic growth and development. Growth and development is also linked with energy and use of energy, and in this case you can see that the rapid rise of the human population and the rapid rise of the use of fossil fuel to produce the food for that rapidly rising population are inexorably linked. And in fact, if we look into the future, which is not as bleak as it looks, but it could be made to sound that way, especially if you listen to people like James Lovelock and read his new book called The Revenge of Gaia, for instance. It says that we are heading towards a disaster when in another 50 years, if we have another 3 billion people to feed, it will require the entire size of Brazil that you can see here to feed them. And yet today, we farm the size of South America, meaning that about 80% of the land that we could farm is being farmed. And certainly we don't have the size of Brazil left over to act as a reserve in case we do have another 3 billion more people in another 50 years. So here we sit, or stand, and wonder what to do. And indeed, in the past, as the historical perspective on building energy use pointed out so aptly, we are a highly adaptable and adjustable species. When the conditions tell us to change, we change. The Tall and Green Building meeting is being held as the result of that perception by not just the academic community, but by the real producers of quality buildings around the world. And I feel very privileged to be a part of this, even though I'm not a builder. Deforestation is replaced with farmland. And farmland continues to encroach into the natural environment and removes the ability of the earth to suck up all of the CO2 that we're so busy putting into the atmosphere through various means. I believe I mentioned, or at least on the slide it said that agriculture throughout, at least in the United States, uses 1/5 of all the fossil fuel that we consume. The other fifth is used by cars, and that leaves 3/5 left for industrial purposes. So the solution that we perceive, at least the solution that suggests itself most efficiently and most doable, is to just simply move our food indoors and produce it there. It seems like a radical approach to farming. Obviously it is, but it's already being done. So I don't have to tell you that hydroponically grown vegetables and fruits adorned the very food that we were eating at the breaks. Holland is a huge producer of a variety of produce. Texas, California, Florida, and other states also produce massive amounts now of tasty, healthy, organically grown vegetables and fruits. So why can't we take that already successful system of creating food security for us and combine that with the talents that I see represented in front of me today and put them into large, beautiful, gorgeous, transparent, energy-efficient buildings which make our food for us next door, so that we don't have the food miles associated with, let's say, a tomato grown in Holland and getting to my plate in New York, or a melon that's grown in Thailand and makes it to your plate at this meeting. Why can't we do that? And the answer is, well, we can do anything we want, basically. Human beings can do virtually anything they want, and the proof of that is, well, look around. Everybody has a cell phone, everybody has a plasma screen television set. Everybody here wants to go to Mars on a tour, and perhaps in my lifetime we'll all get to do that. So what I'm proposing, or I should say what we are proposing, and I think what a lot of other people also see as a solution to this, is to invent the vertical farm. And in doing so, we will then become as circular as the biosphere is today. So there's this wonderful book called Cradle to Cradle. I heard Cradle to Grave mentioned earlier. You can now talk about Cradle to Cradle in many different ways. And now you've taken a straight line and you've turned it into a circle. And that's an easy thing to do on a drafting table with a compass. It's not so easy to do that without considering all the components necessary to make this actually happen. The big danger is, of course, that we'll blow it and we'll make vertical farms in the middle of cities that will be as inefficient as some of those wonderful buildings that you were showing. And it will become a deficit rather than an asset. So in order to make sure that it works, requires a deep understanding of the way ecology works. And the depth only goes to the point of knowing what to do with waste. And it seems to me that that's the biggest detractor of living in a city, is which cities have the fewest amounts of waste to deal with, because those are the most pleasant places to live. If you have a beautiful breeze that blows away the air pollution, then that kind of waste isn't actually seen too much. But if you live in Denver, let's say, or in Phoenix, or in Edmonton, where you're on the wrong side of the Rocky Mountains, the pollution accumulates to the point of visibility, not just to the people on the ground, but the pilots, when they land you, can point that schmutz out to you as you land through it. So we're now approaching Salt Lake City. You can see it by the haze that lies over what will become the city once we get below it. That's an unpleasant environment. I think this would become a pleasant environment if we learn to couple the raising of our food with the handling of at least municipal waste, from which we could derive the energy from the solids and treat the liquids to remain as a safe water source to begin the process of growing our food in the city proper. The fact that we can grow food indoors, and if we propose to grow it in large cities, gives us the following advantages. A, we get year-round crop production. 2, we have no weather-related crop failures due to droughts, floods, or insect pests. We eliminate agricultural runoff as a pollutant. That is one of the biggest pollutants on earth, agricultural runoff. We allow at the same time, because we're growing our food not on land, but in hydroponic, aeroponic, and other methods as well. If we do it this way, we can actually give land back to nature and allow the land to heal itself. Now, will the land heal itself? That's another good question. So it's one of those proofs of concept. All you have to do is travel to South Korea. And the zone between North and South Korea is well known to everyone. It's called the demilitarized zone. It took a war to create a natural ecotone. In this case, it's a zone between two countries. It's 10 miles wide, and it goes the entire length of the country. It's as beautiful a place on earth as you'll ever want to go, but don't go there because it's all booby-trapped. It's too bad. Another beautiful place, when left by itself to repair, is Chernobyl. Just celebrated its 25th anniversary. And that's all gone back because people have left it. I recommend another book to you. It's called The Earth Without Us. It predicts what would happen if we would all just disappear. And all these beautiful buildings would not have the maintenance, and all the bridges would fall down. And pretty soon, the trees would start to grow back, and then the animals would come back, the biodiversity index would go up, and systems would return to a controlled, cyclical phase, which you would call an ecosystem. If we could imitate that in cities, we'd have the best of both worlds. We'd have our world, and we'd have their world to enjoy as well. There are ways of doing all of this, of course, and there's lots of known technology, and there's some unknown technology that would need to be developed. But like I said, when we put our minds to it, we can do anything we want. We can go to the moon. We can go to Mars. We can go to the nearest star. That's a remarkable accomplishment. This is nothing compared to that. Let's do this first, and then that's when I want to go to Mars too. This is sort of pandering to the environment here, the local environment. Imagine a vertical farm, in this case in the shape of a pyramid. Imagine the water that's contained within this is gray water to begin with, and as the plants transpire it, you could collect it by dehumidification. And then you could store it. That's drinking water, by the way. You could store it underground to keep it as a reserve. You could use human waste as the source of energy by desludging human waste first, and then dry it down, powder it, pellet it, and burn it, and get that energy to use to drive whatever electricity bills this pyramid might need, in addition to, of course, all the solar power that you can collect from, 350 days of sunlight here? This would be an ideal place to put such a vertical farm. There's no soil to speak of, so there's no fertility factors to deal with. You probably don't have any of the insect pests for any of these crops in the local area, so by situating this in a place where they're not present, you can avoid all these disease states of plants that they have to suffer now in the outside world. It's a remarkable vision of Eric's students and his hard work that has resulted in the production of this figure. It's one of many that could possibly be generated, and I hope your minds are racing with your own iterations of what you might imagine a vertical farm to be like. The reason why I feel so positive about presenting this to you is that we have a website called verticalfarm.com, and of course you can respond to that. And this has been up now for the last 8 years, and virtually none of the figures that we show on it were solicited. These were all elicited by the idea. So we would like to share that with you in more detail as time progresses, and suggest very strongly that in the near future, vertical farming will become an integral part of urban life. Thank you.